All right, hello there. This is Dr. Bart from CISC 275, and I am here to talk about lists of objects in React and using useState and modifying React hooks that contain arrays of objects. This is something I've talked a little bit about in class now, but I wanted to create a video that walked through not only the things we talked about in class a little bit, showing off the code that we used in order to modify the use state, but also walk through what it looks like in terms of writing the code that actually renders stuff on screen, and basically flesh out some more of the features. So if we go back to the TA trainer that we've been working with, and I'll mention now that I'm going to do this sort of blind, like I don't have that much sketched out in advance um, in terms of specific details. But I have this TA trainer application that we've been using as an example. Um, Based off this game, I use my TAs where they are playing this game where we have these cards that have a prompt and a recommended answer to the prompt. There's also this order that the users are playing the game in. Um, and in the original version of this, I had a way to swap out different cards from among this giant list that I have stored in a JSON file. I also have a way to add a new card using a modal, but there's not really a way to get access to all the cards put together. They're all just sort of available only one at a time randomly. And I really want a more sophisticated interface for editing these cards. So I've mocked out a little new component that will go in here underneath the card viewer. I figure I'd have some button that controls whether or not it's actually visible. Perhaps even probably replacing the add new card button with edit all the cards. And when you click it, it reveals this, and it has a list of all the different cards in the deck. And each one would have a little button next to it with a little pencil that would let me edit that element and when I click it, it would pop open this box where I can be editing the prompt and the answer, and also this kind field, which is a drop down. There's a few different kinds. They'd have a unique ID that uniquely identifies each one still, and I'd edit this and I could cancel out my changes, or I can click save. This actually modifies how we'll approach this pretty significantly. Choosing the save cancel approach means we'll need additional state to represent these forms rather than editing the deck directly. I'll probably also want to add in some kind of delete button here. I didn't model that out here, but that'd be kind of typical, is having the way to add a new card, delete cards, and edit cards are sort of the basic operations. And of course, the most fundamental one, which is read all the cards. So create, read, update, delete. They call this CRUD, CRUD, and it kind of describes the atomic actions that you usually want to do when you've got a database of stuff. And that sort of carries me into the conversation about the data model, the database, the data structures. Fundamentally, at the heart of any program, we always have some data, right? Where that data comes from, what it represents. These are very much the core questions that we're answering as we're getting started. And it's something you and your team really has to collaborate on and answer before you can make any kind of serious headway. You can put just raw text in there, hard code values, but eventually when you get to anything interesting in your application, you have to have some kind of data model. It's not really a program if you don't have some kind of data model. And in fact, a classic idea in computer science is programs are just algorithms plus data structures. Any piece of software is really the database and the operations you apply to it, the code that runs on it. So in my data model for this application, a lot of it centers around the idea of a deck of cards, and that's the thing I really want to be editing with this new component. And its initial value comes from this card JSON file. So if I go crack that open, you see all these in here. It's worth pointing out, this is just the static data before it's loaded. When it actually gets loaded into memory, when it's turned into this variable and it's passed into the use state, I get access to this deck that I can update the reference to it. I'm not modifying the JSON file, right? We loaded from the JSON file the same way we could have embedded a literal value in there. But after that, after it comes in here, we're done with that file. We don't want to be referencing anymore. We need to be referencing deck. That becomes the canonical source of all of the cards. And we can reference the deck and we can update the deck with new values. And we'll come back to that. We saw an example in class and we've seen before how I can add, but I want to today make sure we should go over how I can edit and how I can remove from it immutably. Other parts of my application that have important state, the visibility of the modal, whether or not the answer if the current card is currently revealed, and of course the active card itself. And I might even actually restructure this while I'm here to sort of highlight that to me the most important piece of data, the piece of state, is this deck idea. The and I'm going to actually even write a little comment above it articulating what this is. The main source of all cards in the deck in the game. And then this is merely the specific, currently chosen card in the deck. And this is meant to be a reference to something from that. In fact, maybe I should highlight that more. Instead of pointing to the first element of cards, it's really the first element of the deck that I care about here. And that might draw a better kind of relationship between the deck and the active card, right? Because the active card, if you may recall, it's getting set using the, if we go into control panel, we have our set active card, aka set card, being used here, choosing a random element from the deck. So there's a very strong relationship between the active card and the deck. We're not modifying the active card, we're modifying the deck. Just to fill out things a little bit more, we also have our answer revealed, whether or not the current card's answer is revealed. And then finally, just to complete the set here, we'll have whether the modal is visible. So this is the add card menu, which may or may not still be there when we're all said and done. At this point, I've just added documentation. I reordered my use states a little bit. Nothing actually changed in the application itself, but this might help spell out someone else coming along, sort of the relationship between deck and active card, and the fact that deck is this really important fundamental bit of data in my model. It's really my core data structure. If you were thinking about, say, a list of semesters, list of courses, a catalog representation, this might be something comparable as the big main source of truth for your application's cards or courses or whatever you're working on, your to-do items, if you're making a to-do app. In this case, I'm making a game that's centered around a deck of cards, and I want to be able to edit that deck. And that set deck function is critical here. I can't simply do things like deck.push in order to add a new card. If I have this new card parameter, it's a card. This is syntactically correct code, and it does add a new element to the list. But if you remember the model of React, it doesn't actually solve the underlying problem. The whole thing in React is that when you use useState, when you've called useState, you get back a little bit of memory. It's kind of like malloc, where you say like, hey, give me a card list, a variable holding a card list. Give me a variable holding a card. Give me a variable holding a Boolean. And by the way, here's the initial value for each of those things. And you request that from React. So it's now tracking all that. And it knows whenever it calls app, the order of these is significant. Say like, oh, well, the first time they call useState, it's going to be this card list thing. And if they've never called it before, they'll give me cards. But if they've called it before, I'm going to remember the current value, the most recent value that they've set once it's changed. So initially, and every time we call useState, it's giving me access to the current value that it has. Initially, for this first useState, it's cards, and therefore deck is initially equal to cards. But at some point, I call setDeck, or I call setVisible, or I call reveal, or I call setActiveCard, and I change the value that's stored in that useState's memory, the thing that it's tracking, that Boolean variable it has on my behalf. The variable over here does not immediately change, but once we call app a second time, once the application renders app again, it will update the value stored. It will take the new updated value that has been stored and assign that to our constant, and therefore we get access to it. And anything that was dependent on it, as we will see, changes too. And the problem with this is if we just rely on mutating the data stored within that constant, we don't tell React, hey, we updated it, right? It does not know from this alone that it needs to call app again. When we use the setters, setDeck, setActiveCard, reveal, setVisible, whatever the second field is that we return from useState, whenever we call those, that tells the application, oh, hey, go draw app again. Go through and run it through its body, updating any of the variables and stuff. Updating, or rather, creating the new constants with the new state that we most recently set. So this is bad. Down here, this is good, and it's a little bit weird to see, right? Like this syntax here. I could have written a different, longer bit of code instead. I could have said, make a new deck, and it's an empty list, and then go through for each of the old cards in the deck. I is less than deck.length, I plus equal 1, and do new deck.push the deck I, and then I could have set deck on new deck. I could have done through all that. Oh, sorry, and then I would also, at the end, new deck.push my new card, right? So copy over all the old stuff and one new element at the end. And then I can call setDeck with that new copy, that new clone of the old deck, where everything's the same except I've added one. I can go through all that, right? That's 5 lines of code, of actual code, plus a curly brace. But it's much easier to use this alternative modern syntax where I unpack a list into a new list and also include a new element. So this is a much slower, not slower, it's the same speed, but a much longer form of the same thing. And we really want to avoid having to write longer, unnecessarily complex code if we don't have to. So we already have, an example here of modifying deck using the setDeck, but let's end up making some more complicated things before we're done, where we're going to be able to edit the deck's individual cards and also remove cards from it. Now, before we do that, we need to be able to actually see all the cards at once, which currently we don't actually have a mechanism to do, right? I can swap between the current cards, but I can't see all of them. So let's get some eyes on it. I'm going to need this new component, right, that I'm trying to build up, the editor panel. So let's create a new component called card, or how about just editor panel, TSX. And I made it a folder. That's obviously incorrect. I meant to make it a file called editor panel.tsx. How about card editor? I want it to be clear that this is specifically the card editor. We're going to need to import React and everything else. Let me just go steal some lines from up here. Let's see. I will have to import React, don't I? That's the more proper thing. And do use state. Yep. Okay. And we're going to be making a functional component. So let me create a new function called card editor. It's important that we match it. And this will be a functional component, so it returns a JSX element. And at the very least, we want it to return just some text, just so we see that it's working on the screen. Sorry, Gesundheit. I just said Gesundheit to myself. Okay, it's very late. I'm very tired, but it's okay. We have card editor. Now I can use it inside of app. We go over to import card editor inside of our main app. dot components slash card editor. Now we have card editor available as a functional component. So we'll slap that in there over here under the card viewer. And let's just see as a starting point how that looks in our new application. Okay, so it's down here. And it's possible that I'd want it to be like over here on the right-hand side, but honestly, I'm pretty much fine with it being below the fold of all this, outside of the normal area of the application's usage. Because this is sort of an instructor-only feature that I'd be using behind the scenes in between games. So let's see. I have a component here, and I wanted it to be populated with the current deck. So that's going to be a thing I need to pass down from the app into my card editor. So let's have deck equals deck. And over here, we need to end up taking in deck. Now, we've seen before some different ways that we can pass in these props, is what they're called. I mean, they're parameters, but React likes to call them props. One interesting sort of mechanism here is the idea of having a variable named props and then specifically having an interface that details the props coming in. And you'll see when I do this, it lets me write a version of these that you might be a little more comfortable with, depending on what your prior experience looks like with the weird curly brace syntax. Note here I've got to import card, this type that I've created previously. Don't get fooled, like there's multiple things labeled card here. I want the interface that I created, not the one from React Bootstrap. If we go crack open that file, you see I have my lovely interface here named card, and that defines anytime I've got an object that has these 4 keys, ID, kind, prompt, answer, the appropriate type, then I can say that that thing is a card. So let me go back here, and I've written props, card editor props, with the idea that inside of this I can write props.deck. Now we'll see that doesn't really do exactly what I want, because I'm rendering out. It doesn't do at all what I want because I just wrote it as just text. I really want to put curly braces around it in order to dump the variables value. But we do that, then we see inside of the generated page that we get an error, right? Objects are not valid as React child. And it's very confused about what I'm trying to ask for because I can't just render the list. I could turn this list of objects, right? It's a card list, into a string. That's a thing I could do. If I have a deck, then I could take out each one of those elements and turn it into a string, maybe getting like, I don't know, the prompt. So let me quickly use my map function, my map method, that lets me give a function to this map method that takes in each element in turn and applies it. So I'm going to spell all this stuff out and then show you the shortened form, the nicer form. If I had get prompt was a function that took in a card and produced a string, then it would simply do card.prompt, right? Nice and simple, fairly straightforward. And I can pass get prompt in as a value. Note that I am not calling get prompt. I'm handing it to map, and map is going to call get prompt on my behalf. And at this point in time, I think it's still, oh, it is visible now. Yeah, so now it knows how to render it because it's just a list of strings. And it's just taking all of them and mapping them, converting them using this function. Now, this is a long thing to write when all I want to do is just get out one attribute. So I can make a anonymous function right here. And I could do that just by getting rid of the, by converting this into the new style syntax. So this function is identical to me writing something like this. Get prompt alt is a thing that consumes a card object, returns a string, and produces card.prompt. So again, these are two equivalent kinds of syntax. Same idea. Oop, got an extra curly brace here. Let's see if it figures itself out. Declaration on 20. I've got mismatched parentheses here somehow. Curly brace, curly brace. No, it looks good to me. What am I seeing wrong over here? Did I mess up my syntax? Oh. Yes, it just needed to be refreshed, that's all. Okay, yeah, so we have get prompt alt. It's exactly the same kind of thing. It's still just a function that does the, gets out a single element and everything. You see it works just fine. I can shorten this further. Why assign to a variable if I don't have? Oh, actually, let me say one other thing is I'm currently using curly braces here, and that would only be necessary if I had a multi-line body. I don't have a multi-line body. I'm just trying to return card prompt, so I can actually substitute it for just card prompt. Just directly use it right there. And this right here, if it's going to be so short, I don't even need to assign it to a variable. I can just slap that bad boy right in there and use it in line. And you see I've transformed that much longer set of code into this much shorter chunk of code. I've got my code that takes this deck of cards and turns it into a list of strings, which is pretty nice if all I wanted was to just slap all that text in there. Now, going back a minute, I was talking about how I could have card editor props, and this is different from how I've been writing it a lot of the time. A lot of the time I've been using curly braces inside the parentheses, and I know that's confusing for a lot of people, but here's sort of the trick, is when I wrote props here, I have the option of unpacking this thing that contains deck, right? It's a object that has a field called deck. I could unpack that field directly into a new object. And when I do that, I no longer have to write props dot whatever. I can just reference deck directly. And if we had another thing like, say, set deck, which was a function that consumed a list of cards, new deck, which is a card list and is void, then I could also reference set deck here. I can unpack any number of these fields into this and get access without having to do props.deck. So it's kind of a shortened bit of convenient syntax there for that. In the same way, I made a whole interface for card editor props, but I could have just taken this declaration and put it right in there. And that's what I've been doing in my other files, right? If we go crack open control panel, we have the unpacked fields and the object definition, the type definition for this right here, separated by the colon. And I think when you kind of see it spelled out a little bit more, it's a bit clearer what's going on. If you want my opinion on things, I think it's a good idea to take advantage of things like this interface for card editor props when you want to, especially if you ever have a chance where you might want to reuse that interface between multiple functional components. That's really handy. At the very least, though, I don't personally like having a props variable. I prefer having them unpacked directly as parameters. So I may or may not stick with having a card editor props interface versus just inlining the definition, the type definition. But I will tend to stick with curly braced unpacked parameter names because I don't like having to write props dot whatever. I think it's unnecessary. I added a parameter here. I got to go back to app and make sure that my function call, aka my template instantiation, my tag instantiation, is matching my parameters. So card editor now, you see it saying, hey, set deck is missing inside of this field, and that's necessary if you're having something that takes in card editor props, which card editor does. It takes in card editor props. I have a set deck function, so let me pass that in. I'm thinking ahead to when I'm going to need set deck. So I'm kind of playing a longer game here, guessing that I'm going to need that in a bit. But it's also demonstrated the syntax, which was my real goal, at least in the short term. It's complaining about use state too. We'll leave that in there for now because I'm very likely to use it. But kind of a bad practice, in fact. Actually, no, I can't not see the error. Don't leave warnings in your code, right? Don't have errors while you're typing if you can help it. Never leave your workspace messy, as my father used to tell me all the time. Um, it's really important that you are able to see what's actually wrong with your application. And if it's being crowded out with warnings and errors, then you're not going to know when you get actual stuff you need to worry about. It's kind of a classic beginner mistake, right? So I have succeeded in rendering my text, all of my prompts, but that wasn't really my goal, right? If we look at this interface that I modeled out here, it wasn't just some big blob of paragraphs. It was meant to be a little bit more elegant. So let's clean it up a little bit. Let's break this onto multiple lines, and instead of just straight up having a div of these, I'm going to make a unordered list. So this is the UL tag in HTML. It is composed of li tags. So if I wanted to just have one, here is a tag, and then we'll do here is another tag. If we go back over here, you'll see that I now have a bulleted list of stuff. Now that's fine if I wanted to hard code it, but I really want it to be based off my deck. And I can use the same kind of idea I had here to generate the li tags. So previously I was having it render out card prompt as just a string value, but a fun thing is I can actually have it render out JSX, right? So I'm embedding my JSX inside of my JavaScript inside of my JSX. Oh, and I'll need nested parentheses, curly braces there in order to signal to it that I'm making a JSX expression. Now, I've said before it was going to be a string, but now it's really going to be JSX element, would be more accurate. And TypeScript's actually pretty smart. It tends to be able to infer things like this. It knows that, oh, of course, you're literally returning an li, so it must be JSX. Never wrong to tell it, though, right? This is me asserting that I understand what I'm returning, as opposed to just having to help out the compiler. So at this point now, we do actually get our rendered LIs, and that's moving along nicely, right? We now have an improved situation in terms of actually being able to read this stuff. Formatting isn't what we want, but that's fine for getting started. I actually have some bigger plans for how I want to format things using React Bootstrap. But for now, I have this. A issue that I'd encounter as I get more complicated code going on here is that I have this list of things being rendered, and each element needs to be distinguishable by React. And there's a page in the documentation that talks more about this. React lists keys. If you go to this page in the documentation, it talks more about this this problem of needing to have keys that uniquely identify elements in the list. So this is sort of a good practice here. Whenever you're using map to generate a bunch of elements, is you need to have a attribute called key, and it needs to take in a value that uniquely distinguishes each of these LIs. Now, fortunately for me, if you go look at my interface for a card, you'll see that there is this ID, and that is meant to be unique for each card. So that's a very convenient thing. I'll just slap in there card.id. And now it should hopefully recognize that I've uniquely separated each one of these. And this is not about the actual interface. This is just about how React wants me to write my my list creations. We're making progress now. We have actually separated out each one of these individual elements, and I'm gonna actually start giving myself a bit more space here, because the body of this is about to get a lot more complicated. Because I don't want to just render the prompt, I also want to render the answer. So div card.prompt / div card.answer / div. And let's take a look at how that looks in the browser. Yeah, so now we've got the first thing and the second thing. Again, I'm not going to worry about formatting just yet. I want to dump all the information in there to be able to read it visually, be able to see the application, and then I'll start looking at the accordion in React Bootstrap. So one other thing is the kind. That's the last field. Card.kind. And I suppose I also want to see for now the card.id, right? I already told React about it internally, but that doesn't mean it gets rendered, right? That's a attribute of the li tag. It's internal information as opposed to actually being part of the rendered text. So now I'm rendering all the bits of information in a card, and I can think about how I want to make it prettier for those reading over it. And for that, I'm going to actually bring in React Bootstrap, which I've already loaded in previous things. An accordion is this element that allows you to expand sort of elements. So I could go with this one. That's certainly an option. Then there's other alternatives too. I think I want to go with this. I could just make it a list group. Maybe I want to do that instead, actually. Yeah, I actually like the look of the list group, I think, a little bit more. And yeah, that has nice headings with custom content. Yeah, so let me actually go with the list group. That's closer to what I want. So the HTML here is pretty similar to what I already have too. So that's another virtue of this. I am not necessarily a designer, and I don't feel the need to try and move beyond my bounds and try and be fancier than I need to be. So list group needs to be imported, and instead of list group, I'm sorry, li, we have list group item, both sides. Let's see if it likes that. We have list group from React Bootstrap, and eventually my editor should be able to figure itself out. Compiler's figured itself out. Man, it takes forever for it to load that. All right. So now we have nice boxes separating all this, and we can focus on our content a little bit more and how I want to organize it to match my intended one. Now, my idea here had been to render out only a slim portion of each one of these card prompts along with an edit button to expand it. So we're going to need to have content that's separate for each one of these. And I think it's going to be time to have a custom component to render each individual card in line. So let's go ahead and make another component. It could actually be part of card editor. So whether you put it in a separate file or not is sort of a personal decision. I think the general consensus is one file per component. So how about a card item? How about an editable card item? Editable card item. That distinguishes it from the card viewer that we had before, which was meant to be the read-only component that users see when they're actually playing the game up here at the top, right? Like it's meant to say card viewer and have a nice prompt and everything, versus this will be a specialized editable component. So we need React at the top, just the good convention. And I believe the final project actually requires you to hardcode that. We'll export our function editable card item. And I already know in advance it's going to need to take a card. And that's just going to be a thing of type card. And that's taking in one individual card, as we will see. Import card and return the existing HTML that we already had here. Take all that, slap in a nice div, fix our indentation, and now editable card item can go inside. And it will pass in a individual card that we got from our list. So we gave deck to card editor, and card editor splits it up using map to give us each individual card, which we pass along to editable card item, assuming we can actually get it to work correctly, which we still need to import it in this file. That's very reasonable, very fair. And the type checker loves us, hopefully. Good, excellent. over here, you see nothing's really substantially changed about this. If we look at the inspect results, we can see that we have this div inside of each list group item, and it's got its text. So this is now a new component. If I go investigate over here, we have our editable card item living inside of each of our list group items, all of which is in our card editor. And breaking it up like this, I think, is a really good idea, because now we can think about what an individual card item looks like separate from the whole card editor component itself, right? The list of things being mentally separated from the individual element. All right. Now we want to make it so that for an individual element, an individual editable card element, we have the ability to show or hide part of it. So when it's fully shown, I want it to be showing all 4 of these, but most of the time I want it to only be showing like part of the prompt, maybe the ID. So we're going to have this state per editable card item. It can't be for the card editor because I want to have a different little edit button. Sorry, a different editable button for each one of these things individually. So we're going to need some state, some kind of Boolean variable that will hold it. Let me call useState here. And I think visible, or how about editing versus set editing, useState on a Boolean. Initially, we're not editing any given one of these. We're going to need to import useState from React, get our nice hook. And now we have our set editing and our editing. So initially, we want this to, if we are editing, question mark, then we want to render all of these. But if we are not editing, then I want it to render only the card ID dash card.prompt. And I believe that should be sufficient. Yeah, so right now none of these are being edited, so it's only showing me the ID and the prompt. Excellent. And that actually looks fairly good. We might not even, I was thinking about having it so it would also trim out some of the prompt's text. And that's fairly easy to do, actually, if I remember correctly. I can say slice everything from 0 up until the 25th character. So if it goes longer than that, I want it to cut it off with a ... I don't want this to be a whole thing, but that was my original plan, and you can do some fun things to slice it, and then if it's longer than that, add a ... at the end. This seems to be working fairly well, though. The prompts are fairly short themselves. Okay, so I notice here an opportunity to do a little bit of refactoring. I could, if I wanted to, move this div on the outside of my ternary if expression. And if I wanted to do that, well, no, I don't really want to do that, actually. I kind of like the fact that I don't have to have curly braces inside of this. So we've got 2 different sort of things for editing versus not editing. And technically speaking, you might even break this up into another component of like the shortened editable card item and the full editable card item. That would be perfectly reasonable. And I could imagine someone wanting to write it that way. But the real thing I want to focus on right now is adding in a button that will let me set it to be editing or not editing. So this is going to be a toggle button. Let's see. Let's have a toggle button. Do they have a recommendation in React Bootstrap for toggles? They have checkbox radio. That's kind of the same idea. Yep, that's probably close enough. No, okay, they have a whole dedicated toggle button. Yeah, let me load that and put it in here. You know, before I said that, I said, oh, I don't want to move this. I do actually want to move this because this is going to be consistent between the two. So let me do this quick refactor. see if I can fix this real quick and then explain what I'm doing. I need to test to see if we are editing, then put these 4 pieces of information in there. Otherwise, just have the 1. Do I agree with this? Do I like this structure? No, I really don't. I'd rather have the button in there. Oh, went too far. Okay. That looks pretty good again. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to focus on just the button first. So over here, have a new toggle button whose variant is going to be, I like the primary. And it will say edit for now. I'll need to import toggle button, which it claims is available. And I will need value, I believe. Property value. Let me just quickly be looking at the docs to see that it is indeed a thing called value. Yes, value is required. Value of the input should be unique amongst its when it's nested in toggle group. Just to make sure I understand the model here, we have checked versus unchecked, and its value is literally just 1 in this example. Well, that's fine. It also says it needs an ID, but it's not freaking out about that at the moment. So we have our edit at the least. I suspect that's not what we're going to want to use, but let's hold off on it for now. More importantly, I want it so that edit button actually does something. When its value changes, I know what I want the value to be. I am being very silly. The whole point of this was to have the value come to be editing, right? Make sense? No? It wants it to be a string value. That's fair. Let's see how it feels about using about a nice type check, nice ugly typecast by adding 0 to the value, or adding a string to the value becomes the string representation of it. We'll see if that ends up working once I've got my onChange handler. So onChange is going to require a function that takes in an event. Let me actually spell out the words because we are decent, wholesome people. And it calls setEditing, passing in the event's current target checked value. I see. Checked is actually the thing we want to set to editing. Value is kind of a misnomer in this case. I believe it doesn't actually matter what its value is as long as it's unique amongst all of its siblings. So if I was doing multiple toggle buttons, I'd have value 1, value 2, value 3 apparently. That's what I'm reading in the docs right now over here on the side. So I have my edit button. And if we go look at my editable card item, we've got the state. It's currently false. And I wonder why the onChange doesn't do anything. SetEditing to be the current value checked, which should be getting toggled. Let me see what else I need to do. There's a bunch of other fields in here. Type equals checkbox. Feels unnecessary, but let's try that. Checked, whether or not it's checked. Intriguing. This is the fun part of live coding, is we don't necessarily know if it's going to work. So we have to play the debugging game. Type checkbox. Does it actually have a click handler? Or a change handler? Firm maybe. Firm maybe. All right, going through the documentation, we've got toggle button in a button group. That might be necessary, might not be. What else we got? Checked on change. Let's try bringing over the button group because I am suspicious that they have it and I don't. Sometimes you got to be really specific with these form things. Button group needs to be imported. And currently it's not really liking this toggle button. Let's see. I can't help but notice that the React Bootstrap one isn't really working either. Like the one on their actual website doesn't work very well. Use state, checked value. Oh, that's weird. It's got like a weird delay. Oh, that one's disabled. That one doesn't even work. This one works. It has an ID and its outline. Let's add in the ID. I don't want that to be the reason why it's not working. So we'll choose an ID name of, note I'm using the backticks. That's a very exciting thing. Toggle editing in order to embed a variable, and its variable value will be card.id. So this is a template literal, by the way, in case you've never seen this syntax before. It lets me do string interpolation, so I'm embedding a variable directly in it. I could also have written this as toggle editing dash plus card.id. The advantage of this one is kind of smaller, but I like to be able to just embed my variables directly without having to do separate string literals and concatenation. So we have that. Let's see. Hey, okay, wow, needed the ID. You know, it said required in the docs, but TypeScript wasn't freaking out at me, so I kind of naively assumed it wasn't as necessary. So now I have this edit button that expands it into a fully editable thing. And it's kind of fun. You can actually click on one of these guys and see the current use state, and the current state of it is false. If I click on it, now the state is true. And you're not seeing it, but like it's calling the function again, right? It's calling editable card item, this function, editable card item again. This time, instead of using false, the value that gets passed, that it retrieves for this use state is true for that specific item. But remember, even though there's many of these, each one has its own use state. And it's getting the appropriate one based on its position. It knows which one it is thanks to the key that we assign to it, the parent element. So we have a way to edit it. We don't currently actually have a way of unediting it. So at the very least, let's make a cancel button. So this will be a, I guess the same thing really. But you'll see that we're going to have a cancel and save button. So that's why I wanted to separate these two things and not have them reused between them. Let's see if just copying and having it say cancel is sufficient. Yeah, okay, cool. So now we've got edit and cancel. And for cancel, I'm thinking it should be yellow, which is warning. There's better rhyme and reason for picking out these colors, but I think that'll be sufficient. In fact, maybe I actually want it to be light or outline secondary. I think we won't worry too much about the colors for the moment because we're already, 50 minutes into the video, and at some point I have to sleep tonight. But we have the ability to edit and cancel out of editing each one of these little editable card items. And that's all well and good, but we really wanted to actually give me the ability to edit the text, not just see it, but edit the text inside of these prompt answers. So currently they are being rendered just as text and divs, but I need to turn them into forms, input boxes or text areas. Similar to what we had for the add new card in the modal, is we have these boxes. So in fact, on that note, let's actually just go steal some code that we had before. In our add card modal, I had the form, and that looks pretty close to what I want for my editable card item. And we'll go in and paste that here, import our relevant attributes. Hey, I want you to import form. There we go. And we no longer have prompt and answer as variables. Now we're going to have to do card.prompt and card.answer. And we'll find out in a minute that that's not sufficient. That seems like it might work, but it probably won't in the end. Partially because of this thing right here is we don't have a set prompt. Let's hold off on that for now. Let me just, I think, or best way I want to comment this out, let me actually just delete this for now. And I say delete, but I'm going to very carefully, excuse you, sir, take this and put it as a comment in the JavaScript. Same thing down here for the on change for this one. I don't really need to. I can go back to the other file and find out what I wrote. So let's just remove the on change just so that we can see that we create the text boxes. So prompt suggested answer shown. That's really nice. We probably want to also render the ID and the kind. We'll come back to those in a bit. For now, we have the box here, and this is rendering the things from the cards, but it's not going to let me actually edit them. Even if I type text into this box, that's not tied to the model. What we have here is a one-way data bind, right? We've bound the value from the list, the reading of the value from the list to this. And if we had a mechanism to, say, add new cards, we could actually update this list very easily. So if I go to here, add new card, and say my changes, that will render this whole box to add in our new prompt text. And we go check out the edit, and it has those values in it. But it doesn't matter what I do to this. If I can't even edit it right now because it's tied strictly to the model. Like I'm over here typing stuff, and it doesn't let me do anything. If I went and edited my model, it'd be one thing, but we don't have a mechanism to do that yet because I removed the on change value. Now let's bring that back, right? That's the sound of code being restored. So I don't have set answer and set prompt. That was a thing that I had over in add card modal because I had my own local use states. One approach to this is in card editor I have set deck, and I can pass set deck down to my helper function. Sorry, my editable card item class, and accept it as a parameter. Set deck will take in a deck, which is a card list, and produce void. So it's a function. This is getting a little bit long on this line, but if I can still type it correctly. Now, I can't just call set deck. That does not work. Set deck is expecting a list of cards, and I have here not even a single card. I have the prompt of a card, but we know which card. So this comes back to what I was doing in class before of wanting to be able to edit a card or attributes of a card that already exists. Let's make set prompt, which is going to be based off set deck. So set prompt is going to be a function that I create. Set prompt takes in a string value representing the new prompt and produces nothing. It's going to need to call set deck, passing in the original existing deck. So currently we're going to need that passed down too, right? And I'm not currently doing so. That's going to need to be here. Yoink. Deck to deck, and pass in deck And I'll make mention now that we'd probably want to be abstracting some of this to be a function at a higher level. Um, but we'll see if that becomes relevant. I say abstract at a higher level. What I mean by that is instead of passing in set deck and deck, the things I'm going to define could also be defined probably up here in card editor, or even one level higher than that. And I could be passing down a function like add card, like the one I created over here. But I've got the variables down here, right where I want them. So let me go ahead with that. I've mentioned before that I need to be using setDeck in order to update my my deck. I can't just do the thing I wish to do, which would be like, if we were going to write this naively, if we're going to write this without thinking about React and immutable, if we were going to do this the mutable approach, you'd probably end up thinking about something like this. Go through each element one at a time. I is less than deck.length and I plus equals 1. And if the current dex.id equal card.id, then hey, that's the one we want. Update that one's prompt to be new prompt. And that's all well and good back in 181 and 220, but we don't live in that world anymore. We live in the immutable world of React, and this doesn't tell React that we changed things. Instead, we want to make a new deck based off the old deck, changing the relevant value, and pass that into setDeck. So, new list based off the old one. This would create the exact same list, but we need to modify one of the elements instead. So instead, we're going to call map. We've seen map being used with the deck before. When we call it, we end up passing in a function that consumes a card and produces a new value. In this case, the new value is going to be a card. It has to be creating a deck of cards in order to pass it into setDeck. So this thing better return a card. In fact, let me be explicit that that's what this function is going to return. If it's going to return a card, well, one easy thing is to just return card. And that's going to create an exact duplicate of the original deck that we passed in. It also wants set answer. Let me do this one at a time. Being patient. No reason to try and force it to go beyond where I need to. Okay. We have a issue in our code. Nope. Okay. Just took a while to update. You updated down there. You telling me lies? You telling me lies? You telling me lies? I shouldn't have rerun it, but I should have just told it to restart itself without needing to rerun the entire application. Well, in a second, this will reappear, and the application will load. Come on, you can do it, React. Starting the development server. Hey, there you are. And we'll see if we have an actual error message instead of it just whining. Good chance for me to grab some water. Normally you'd remove this in post, but it turns out that editing videos takes a very long time, and that's time that could be spent on professors grading, giving feedback, making new assignments, getting sleep because it's almost 3 a.m. But alternatively, we could also just be writing React code. Here we go. So at this point, I have not really achieved anything other than I have a set prompt that will set the deck to be an exact duplicate of the original deck, right? I'm going through each card and returning that card unchanged. Now, I said before, I don't want to make it unchanged. I want it to be I want it to have every card the same except for the current card that I'm editing. We know what that card is based on its ID. That distinguishes it from every other one. So if I'm looking at a given card, its ID being equal to, oh, I need to separate these. Let's see, how about we have this one be old card? Yeah, old card versus our new editing individual card. So we'll have card.id equal old card ID. If that's the case, then the expression we want to return is going to be a certain thing that I'm going to talk about in a second. The easier case is the else, where okay, they are not equal, therefore this is some unrelated card, we don't care about it, return the old card unmodified.
But if it is something slightly different, we need to we need to create a copy of that card with different field. In particular, prompt needs to be now new prompt. If you ever want to make an object based off an old object, you can use this syntax. So here I've created a new object based off the existing one. Let's see if it wants to calm down about yeah, there it goes. This is a clone of the original, but it's a different object. I've unpacked the values from old card into this new object. Therefore, it knows it has the right type. I'm also going to say, oh, by the way, and here's a new value for a key called prompt. And with that, I believe I now have everything I need to actually be able to edit this. Let's find out. So if I say, boy, these are really, really tough. Having a lady as a boss, so just changing the wording a little bit. I believe now, yeah, it actually updated the value in here directly. And this is not going to persist across page loads, but I did actually update the value that was stored in my deck. And if I go check out my components and my top level app, then the state for this deck, you see it has actually changed. And if I go and edit it to be even very different, some other text here, you see it's actually updating the stuff stored in the model persistently. And technically that's now a card that we could get from here. If I swap the cards, it could conceivably actually get it. I really need the leap button in order to improve my odds of getting this random one, because there's like 100 of these things. You have to take my word for it that it would be able to draw it from that list, because it's drawing a random element from the deck, and this is now the value for that thing in the deck. So that was how I did it for prompt, and I could do the same thing for set answer. And if you go online, you'll find that there's many ways to shorten it so that we wouldn't have to make two different functions for each one of these. I'm not going to spend the time doing that. I want to give you a solution that works consistently and doesn't require fancy things. But know that they exist, and it's something that you can dig into. But here's going to be the common thread whenever you're working on this kind of stuff is get something working, right? Elegant, clean code, elegant code, short code, concise code, that's all well and good, but it's not as important as correct code and readable code. And if you manage to find some snippet online that doesn't make sense to you and it doesn't work, then that's not really helpful. So don't try and get yourself too fancy. Don't be afraid to just rely on the simpler version of the code that works. And that's what I'm trying to go for here with my set prompt and set answers. So if I go back to my add card modal and I steal this line, it should now actually work again. And I should be able to update my suggested answer too. And if I type in banana, cool. Now, this is all well and good in the sense that I'm able to directly edit the list. But if we remember what we had in here, I didn't actually want to be directly editing this. I wanted to have the ability to save and cancel. And that's not what my cancel button currently does. It's acting as a save button because I'm directly editing the list. I really want to have it so that it's stored in these values, and then at some point I click save, I click save to transport them over to edit the deck at that point. Alternatively, I would have a cancel that would just toss out the existing data and not modify the deck. So let me reformulate what I currently have. But let me just highlight that, like, if you wanted to be editing the deck directly, this code would be sufficient. Now, instead, I want it so that each one of these has their own sort of like local prompt and answer that I choose to either save or not save when I'm ready. So let's go and make some new use states, and we'll call it new prompt, set new prompt.
That's a string value. False. Nope, that's not a string. New prompt. And same thing for our new answer. Set new answer. That'll be a use state string 2, new answer. Doesn't need to be capitalized. And in here, I am going to have these events set new prompt, set new answer. I don't want it to be tied to card.prompt. I need to be tied to new prompt and answer, new answer. The initial value, I wrote new prompt and new answer, is going to come from card.prompt, card.answer. And this ties it back. This ties it back to the thing in that was stored in the deck, right? We had the deck over here. We broke it up to get each individual card. That's what we're passing into this card item. So we have a card, and we're going to use it as the starting value for the new prompt and new answer fields. And critically now, set new prompt and set new answer are going to update the local state in that React app, in that React component. So if I go look at one of these bad boys, and we see they've got this current state, false, some other text here, and banana, that's tied to the thing that comes initially from the thing in the deck that we can actually see conveniently right here. But watch this. If I edit this stuff, this will become hello world. The thing that's stored in the deck does not change. It's still some other text here. And like that banana over here, if I change it to be applesauce, it changes in this editable component, but that does not change the thing stored in the deck just yet. I want that to only happen when I click a save button. So if we go over here and we make a new button, button, who's got the button? Please import the button for me. Come on, quick fix, add the button. This will be variant equals success. That's the green button. It will say save, and most critically, on click handler. When we click, I want it to set, I'm going to need I can actually just write set prompt. Now I've written set prompt previously to be a function that consumes a new prompt. But here's the fun thing is I already created that use state, new prompt. It's a string value. It matches the other one exactly. Same thing with new answer. So now we're using the closure of new answer and new prompt, right? It's not a parameter, it's a closure over this variable, this use state. And I will call, when I click the button, I will call set prompt. I will also, sorry, I need to give it a function that will call set prompt. And set answer. And one more thing, it should make it so that it's no longer editing. So set editing to be false. So it will update 3 different things. Let's see if any of that works. So I'm over here, I've got my deck, microaggressions banana prompt. My state, however, is that we currently are editing. The prompt is hello world and the state is applesauce. When I click save, at that point in time, the deck did not update, so that went poorly. Awesome, we got some debugging ahead of us. Let's see. Did it update? No, that's different. Hold on. Let's just test something. This is the first. This is the second. I click save. This is the first. This is the second. I go to deck. Oh, okay. It's updating the answer, but not the prompt. I call set prompt. I call set answer. Set prompt sets the deck to be prompt, new prompt. New prompt comes from over here, based on card and old card. Answer, new answer. That makes sense. I've got new prompt, new answer, set new prompt. Event target value, no, that's good. Think. Set prompt, set new prompt. Those are the ones being called. Set new answer, that's all in accordance. We check in here that the deck is actually, well, that's something to be suspicious of. It is definitely updating this. Let's try it on this one. Prompt 1, answer 1, or actually make this 2. Oh, I hope it isn't that. I hate that problem. No, it's consistently updating answer. It's consistently not updating prompt. Wait. Is this because I am... God, I hate this problem. I recognize this problem because one updates this one and this one goes second. Yeah, this goes back to what I was saying about the way that React works. So remember, I'm making this immutable copy and I am not, yes, I'm going to need to combine these into one big function because, and that will make this code easier and cleaner anyway. Like there's no reason to have set prompt and set answer other than I was trying to follow a thing. But if you think about the flow here, you can probably see my mistake. I called set deck and created a new copy of the deck with one of the cards having a different prompt. Then I did it again. And this was the second one, right? Like I called it second. It updated the deck a second time, but I never modified deck, right? When you call set deck, it does not change the value stored in deck. You can't. Think about it. It's a constant, right? That thing that it came from that I assigned to originally all the way up here, it's a constant. So you wouldn't expect it to change the contents of the list. So you have to be really careful. After you call set deck, you haven't modified deck. So the easy thing here is to instead have update deck. And it's going to be a single thing. That simplifies this code dramatically. And it will, at the same time as it updates the prompt, also update the answer. There we go. So now we're immutably setting set deck only once. And when we do so, we have probably correctly fixed the issue. So go in and edit, and this will be numeral 1, uno, and numero dos. And quick check. Currently it's this. I click save. Hey, numero uno, numero dos. Excellent, excellent. And down here we see that. It changes each time. Hello world. How are you doing? And click save. And notice it's a little bit faster now too. I don't know if you could tell that from before, but this would have been a problem with it was when I was doing each edit, every time I called on change, it was firing this very complicated function that went through and looked for each element. And granted, that's surprisingly fast. Like it's not a terrible thing to be doing on occasion, but doing it every single step, this is an on function call on a list of say 100, 2,000 cards, like that would be a long time. So avoiding it by batching it with the save is actually a performance improvement. Now, I only know that from experience. You want to be careful trying to prematurely optimize any kind of application, right? It's usually not worth it until you know something's gone wrong. Let me make sure the cancel button actually works. So it's not editing the deck. It does leave this. I could imagine wanting it so that when you click the cancel button, it would actually reset it to whatever the current value from the deck is. So here's a little helper function for that. Reset deck, void will call not set deck, but set new prompt to be card.prompt and set new answer to be card.answer. And I believe now when I call this, and let me change my cancel to stop being a check button and instead be a regular old button. So I get more features. Reset deck. I called it reset deck. That's a total misnomer. Reset editable fields. Okay, let's go see if my new fancy dancy cancel button actually cancels out, resetting the values. Hey, there we go. So now if I make a modification and click cancel, when I come back in, it's now back to whatever it was before. So that's cool. So let's go look for this. I want to see if this actually updates anything. My gut says probably not based on the model, but let me try something. You've exhausted all of your strategies down here. If we go and edit it, we just say this should be different. But I genuinely don't remember if I'm making a clone. Now it is actually making a separate instance. So that's a matter of just how the card viewer, of how the swap current card thing is connecting the two things. I believe it's not putting a reference in there. I believe it's actually putting in a clone based off get random element. I assume. It's not really a feature that I wanted to dig into, so let me hold off on that because this is already an hour and 16-minute video, and I'm sure we have more to go. We have the ability to edit individual fields now, which is great. Our deck is actually editable. We have save and cancel. I could show the ID and the kind. The kind is a drop down, so it's a slightly different form element. But that's not really necessarily the biggest change. Instead, I think the other thing I want to do is add a delete button. I really don't like having no way to delete these fields. So this is a thing that can't really live in, well, could live in editable card item. Yeah, it does live in editable card item. So I want to have a delete operation, and we'll put it over here when we are editing. Yoink. And hey, I'm not. Come on now. Just trying to copy and paste. Wasn't meant to be a whole thing. Oop. And we'll make it danger. Delete. Delete this. And it doesn't actually matter what it sets editing to, because when we call delete this, we'll see that it ends up actually deleting the entire element. Or rather, it's no longer going to be rendered. So this will be somewhat similar to our set deck that we had before. The only difference is that instead of mapping each element, we're going to be filtering. So filter is another method of lists that, given this predicate function, it takes in a individual card, and that predicate function is supposed to return a Boolean indicating whether or not it should keep the result. In particular, if it's true, then I believe it's kept, and if it's false, then it's removed. So it's actually going to be quite simple. We're going to be looking through each element and asking the question, hey, this one isn't the target ID, right? This old card is not this card ID, right? As long as that keeps being true, we'll keep keeping the elements. Let's see, Boolean is not assignable to card. That's my bad. I said it was a card, but it's actually a function that consumes a card and returns a Boolean. That's simply the pattern of filter. Nope, that's out of date. Trust me. Use the latest version. There we go. So if I go through here and I'm so offended by this one, I just got to delete it. Yes. Cool. Cool. So we're going through and filtering out all of these. And you could imagine other things happening here, right? Like I could combine what I'm doing with add new cards modal in order to have it so that I'm when I click edit, it instead launches a individual modal for each one of these things. But the fundamental idea here is consistently the same, that I have my card editor uh, taking the deck, the whole big list of things, mapping it to individual components, and those components know how to deal with the individual element, and whether that's filtering it from the deck, or updating its values in the deck, or even if it was just adding a new element to the deck. It's always the same kind of general idea. So whether this is a button that launches a modal or a individual visible item or whatever, that's sort of the model for how this works. And I see that we just got to about an hour and 20 minutes, and to me that seems like a good amount of time for this. To me, this is some of the peak important ideas in terms of working with mutable and immutable state. So hopefully most of that made sense. If it didn't, I really want to encourage you once again to reach out and ask questions and get the help that you might need in order to work with this. So thank you and have a good night.